Imagine standing on the quarterdeck of your own pirate ship, the salt wind whipping at your coat, the black flag snapping above like a promise of liberty unbound. You have fought, bled, and commanded men who would slit throats for a single piece of eight. Yet in this moment, as the defeated captain of the enemy vessel kneels before you, bloodied, defiant, but alive, you feel something stir that no amount of gold or grog can silence. Mercy, a single word, yet it carries the weight of chains you thought you had cast off forever. What price does a man pay when he chooses compassion over cruelty in a world that devours the weak? When the very freedom he has seized demands he become the monster he once fled. The pirate captain gazed at the man he could so easily end, James Macrae, whose ship had cost nearly 100 of his own lives, and decided otherwise. He spared him, gave him a battered vessel to limp home, watched him sail away into the horizon. His crew watched too, silent at first, then whispering, then raging. For in their eyes, mercy was not virtue, it was weakness, a crack in the armor of survival. And cracks on a pirate ship invite the sea itself to rush in. How long can a leader hold to his own code when the men who follow him hunger for blood instead of principles? When the illusion of freedom reveals its true cost, not in treasure lost, but in loyalty betrayed. The captain believed he commanded his fate. He was wrong. The ocean stretched empty before them now, vast and indifferent. But the real storm was brewing below decks, in the hearts of men who no longer recognized their leader. Freedom, they would soon teach him, is never free. It exacts payment in isolation, in abandonment, in the slow realization that the man who spares a life may one day beg for his own. And so the question lingers, heavy as cannon shot. What happens when the pirate who refuses to become fully savage discovers that savagery was the only thing keeping him alive? Edward England was not born a pirate. He began as an honest privateer, sailing under lawful letters of marque during the wars that ravaged the early 18th century. But when those wars ended and the commissions dried up, the line between legal predation and outright piracy blurred for many men like him. Captured by pirates himself, he was given a stark choice: join them or die. He joined, and in time, through cunning and courage, he rose to command his own ship, the Fancy, a name that once carried the irony of a man who had little left to fancy but survival. By 1720, he was no longer a reluctant recruit. He was captain. His crew respected his skill in battle, his knowledge of the winds and currents that could mean life or death in the Indian Ocean. Yet they also whispered about something else: his reluctance to embrace the full brutality that defined their trade. Where others tortured for sport or killed without hesitation, England often spared lives. He released prisoners when ransom seemed unlikely. He avoided unnecessary cruelty. To some, these were signs of weakness. To others, perhaps remnants of a conscience that refused to drown completely. The Fancy prowled the waters off the Malabar coast and beyond, preying on rich East India Company vessels. Wealth flowed in: gold, silks, spices, but so did the tension. A crew fed on violence grows restless when denied its full measure. And England's mercy, though sporadic, began to feel like a betrayal to men who measured loyalty in blood spilled and vengeance taken. On that fateful day in July 1720, the Fancy and a consort ship engaged the Cassandra, commanded by James Macrae. The battle was savage. Cannon tore through hulls. Men fell in heaps. When the smoke cleared, the Cassandra was theirs, but at terrible cost. Nearly 100 of England's men lay dead or dying. Victory tasted of ash. And then came the moment that would change everything. Macrae, wounded but unbroken, stood before England. The crew demanded his head. England refused. He spared the man, gave him a crippled ship to escape, watched him sail away. In doing so, he believed he had preserved some shred of humanity in a world that had long since abandoned it. But had he, or had he merely handed his enemies, his own men, the weapon they needed to destroy him? What happens when a captain's moral compass points in a direction his crew can no longer follow? When the freedom he claims for himself begins to feel like a noose tightening around his own neck? The sea offered no answers, only silence. And in that silence, the first cracks in command began to widen. The night deepened, and with it the divide aboard the Fancy. What had begun as murmurs in the forecastle now carried openly across the deck. Voices no longer bothered to lower themselves when the captain passed. Eyes followed him, not with respect, but with calculation. In the world of piracy, authority rests on fear as much as on skill. To show mercy in battle was one thing. To show it when the crew had paid in blood was another. and blood, they believed, demanded blood in return. John Taylor, the quartermaster, emerged as the voice of that demand. Tall, scarred, and unyielding, he had sailed with England long enough to know his captain's habits. He had watched the sparing of Macrae with growing contempt. To Taylor and those who gathered around him, mercy was not a virtue. It was treason against the code they lived by. A captain who spares an enemy captain spares his own death, they argued. And in their eyes, England had crossed that line. The confrontation came swiftly. Below decks, in the dim glow of lanterns, Taylor gathered the most discontented men. They spoke of division, those still loyal to England's leadership, and those who now saw him as a liability. The loyal ones were few, the others far more numerous. Taylor did not yet call for outright mutiny. He did not need to. He simply asked the question that hung like smoke in the air. Can a man who will not kill his enemy be trusted to protect his friends? England felt the shift before he heard it confirmed. When he summoned the officers to his cabin, fewer came than before. When he walked the deck, fewer saluted. The black flag still flew above, but its promise of liberty now felt hollow to the very man who had raised it. Freedom, he had once believed, meant the right to choose one's path, even the path of compassion. Now that choice was being weighed against the cold arithmetic of survival. What does a leader do when the men he commands begin to see his principles as a threat to their own lives? When the code he lives by becomes the very thing that isolates him? Does he double down on his beliefs, risking everything? Or does he bend just enough to preserve command? The sea offered no counsel, only the creak of timbers and the low growl of discontent rising from below. And in that sound, England began to hear the first whispers of his own undoing. The mutiny did not come with a single shout or a drawn cutlass in the open. It arrived like the tide, slow, inevitable, and impossible to push back. Taylor and his faction moved at first light. They took the quarterdeck while England still stood at the bow, alone with his thoughts. When he turned, he saw pistols already leveled. Not at his heart, not yet, but at the few men who had remained loyal. The message was clear. Step aside, or watch them die for your mercy. England did not fight. He had spent years choosing not to spill blood when it was not necessary. Now that same choice left him no weapon but silence. He handed over command without a word. The black flag still flew, but it now belonged to another. Taylor wasted no time. The Fancy and the captured Cassandra turned toward the nearest land, a small, forgotten island off Mauritius. There they put England ashore with 3 loyal souls who refused to abandon him. No treasure, no weapons beyond a single axe and a knife, a few barrels of spoiled provisions, and one small, leaking boat they had stripped from the prize. As the 2 pirate ships sailed away, their sails shrinking on the horizon, England stood on the rocky shore and watched the last thread of his command vanish. The freedom he had once offered Macrae had now been turned against him. The same mercy that spared a life had cost him his ship, his crew, his name. In the quiet that followed, the weight settled deep. Was this the price of refusing to become the monster the world demanded? Or had he simply been blind to the truth, that in the pirate life, compassion was never strength, only a debt that sooner or later must be paid in full? Days blurred on the barren island. They built a rough shelter from driftwood and sailcloth. They rationed what little food remained. At night, the captain sat apart, staring at the empty sea, the same long dark coat now torn and salt-crusted, his tricorn hat long lost. Doubt crept in like the tide. Had his principles been courage, or simply pride? Had he led men to their deaths by refusing to lead them as they truly were? Isolation does not shout, it whispers. And in those whispers, a man begins to question whether the freedom he chased was ever truly his. The small boat they patched together waited on the beach like a final, mocking promise. To stay meant slow death. To sail meant trusting the same ocean that had already taken everything else. What remains of a captain when even his own men have cast him out? When the moral choice that once defined him becomes the very chain that binds him to loneliness. The sea kept its silence. But inside Edward England, something had already begun to break. The small boat rode the currents for weeks, leaking, half-sinking, 3 broken men and 1 silent captain fighting the Indian Ocean with nothing but patched sails and stubborn will. They made landfall at St. Augustine's Bay on the coast of Madagascar, not as conquerors, but as beggars. The once proud captain of the Fancy now walked barefoot on foreign sand. His long dark coat in tatters, gold trim faded to nothing, his beard long and matted with salt. No fanfare greeted him, No loyal crew, only the charity of other pirates who remembered the name Edward England and pitied the man it now belonged to. He lived on scraps. A little rice here, a piece of fish there. Men who had once feared his command now looked away when he passed. The freedom he had granted Macrae had circled back like a curse. The same mercy that spared one life had condemned his own to slow erasure. In the quiet evenings he would sit on the beach, staring at the horizon, and the question that had haunted him since the mutiny finally found its answer. Freedom had never been free. It had always demanded payment, in loyalty, in comfort, in the end, in dignity itself. And yet, in his final days, something shifted. No grand redemption, no dramatic return to power, just a quiet realization. He had refused to become the monster his crew wanted. In a world that rewarded savagery, he had chosen to remain human. That choice cost him everything. But perhaps, in the silence of that barren bay, it also gave him the only thing worth keeping, the knowledge that he had not betrayed himself. Edward England died there in the winter of 1720 or early 1721. Poor, forgotten, broken in body but not entirely in spirit. The pirate who showed mercy paid the ultimate price. The crew who demanded blood sailed on to riches. Which man truly found freedom? And now the question turns to you. If you were that captain on the quarterdeck, facing the kneeling enemy with your crew watching, would you pull the trigger and keep command? Or would you lower the pistol, knowing the sea would one day demand its price? What is the real cost of staying human in a world that rewards the beast? Think about it. The ocean is still out there, and it always collects,